Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. This is part 2 of a lesson that I'm preparing on how to solve paper 1 for AQA A-level psychology UK curriculum. So in the first part we had seen how to solve social influence and memory sections using May 2025 paper as an example. Today we'll do the same for attachment and psychopathology sections. This video will be useful to international Oxford AQA students also. I do include timestamps below, so you could just skip into the psychopathology section that is relevant for you as well. In this lesson, as in the previous, I will keep explaining to you how to answer the questions, how to read the question, how to interpret and understand what is being asked, how to structure the answer, how to meet mark scheme requirements by addressing the command term correctly and taking into account the marks which have been allotted. So it's all about how to write the answers so that you can solve not only this May 2025 paper but any paper that comes in front of you. Of course, I understand you might need model answers. You need to see sometimes fully written out answers as examples to compare what you are writing. So I have written the model answers for these questions also, and I have uploaded them to my website. You can purchase them from there. And I'm linking them in the description box and the pinned comment below. Before I begin with the lesson, I want you to know that I am a school teacher for A-level psychology and an international tutor since more than 10 years. So if you want to schedule your classes with me so that you can get your A-star grade for your UK AQA or Oxford International AQA curriculum, then you can contact me on my phone number. You can WhatsApp me or you can email me on my email ID. I have left my contact information in the description box and pin comment below. I also help students with paper correction. Many students come to me just to assess their papers and give them feedback rather than taking classes. So if you want any correspondence type of help also, you can contact me below. Please note, but those personal details which I'm giving are only for classes. If you want to ask me anything related to these videos, or if you want to give any suggestions of what videos I should make, or you want to ask any questions about what I have said in the video, anything related to that, please leave in the comments box below. If you're going to contact me personally to talk about the channel videos, you will not get a response. If you want a response, I definitely go through the comments. You'll have to leave your query in the right channel for you to get a response. Okay, so let's begin with today's lesson. So first we come to section C, attachment. Let's look at the first question. I'll just read it out. Two researchers conducted an observational study of reciprocity involving mother-infant pairs in a controlled environment. What is meant by reciprocity in attachment? Looking at it, we can make out it's a research methods type of situation. They're definitely going to ask us something related to research. But as of now, the first question which is there is just asking about a concept, which is reciprocity. The command term is what? What is an AO1 command term? Purely descriptive. There is no situation to which they want us to apply this concept, so it's not AO2, and they've not asked for an evaluation, no strengths and weaknesses. So it is not AO3 also. As I've mentioned in the previous part of the lesson also, anytime they ask you about a concept, like describe, outline, or what is the concept, always begin with the definition. Your first point should always be the definition, nothing else. Like, don't begin with examples or theories, straight off come to the definition. You have to give a second point also. It's a common mistake not to give a second point and to assume that only the definition counts for 2 marks. You have to give a second unique point to get full 2 marks. That second point can be any elaboration or example. Okay, so first let's make the outline for the definition. Reciprocity, depending on which book you have learnt it from, but the definition will have something to the effect of it is a sort of turn taking between the infant and caregiver, and it is a performance of coordinated actions. Make sure you're using good terms like turn taking, coordinated actions, infant caregiver. Don't use casual language, like it is one by one the mother and the child talk to each other or something like that. Make sure you use good psychological language when you're writing. No doubt for the smaller questions, there's not so much emphasis on terminology. That is more prominent in the essay, but doesn't mean it doesn't count in the short questions. Just because there's not always a rubric doesn't mean they're not looking out for terminology. Definition should have good terms. If you're not able to use good terms in the definition, at least initially memorize them or rote learn them till you get a habit of using good terms. Now, for the second point, as I said, you could elaborate. So, you could contrast it from interactional synchrony, which is simultaneously performing the same gestures. If you're giving that interactional synchrony, make sure you're not giving it for its own sake. Make sure to specify that reciprocity is different from the process, another important process in attachment, which is interactional synchrony, and then introduce what it is. So that can be one simple point, because I'm sure you've learned both the concepts. They're so frequently asked, reciprocity and synchrony, that you must have prepared the definitions for both. So an easy thing is just to contrast one with the other for a second point. Another way you could elaborate is by giving anything that any research study has found in one line. Like literally give one line finding. In XYZ study, it was found that reciprocity led to stronger emotional bonding between the infant and caregiver in the toddlerhood of the infant. Something like that. Just make sure you give the finding, not the procedure and all. Don't go into unnecessary details. It's just for 2 marks, and the elaboration is just for 1 mark. So this is what this study found. You could give it that way. Generally, also, what is the benefit of reciprocity? It prepares the child for further social interaction. You could give that as a second point. So very simple, types of elaboration that you could do. Or finally, you could give an example what reciprocity would actually look like in an interaction. So something as a mother smiles to the child. After looking at her, the child smiles back in return. That is an example of reciprocity. So it could be as simple as that. I just quickly take, say, the point which I had given of its importance, that it lays the later foundation for for later attachment, like I said, in toddlerhood and teenage, between the caregiver and infant, even in adulthood, in fact. So just I would say later foundation. So something like this you could give for 2 marks. Make sure not to give any evaluations. Strength or weakness, this is not AO3, such things will not be credited. Now coming to the research methods type of questions. These are the questions which students struggle with the most, because lots of students are good in memorizing. That is what I have seen in my experience. So they're able to answer the shorter questions. But research methods, they ignore, they don't practice enough. It is application based, they become weak in that. And they keep on resisting a lot. Like they don't want to practice research methods. They just want to rote learn what is in the textbook. And they want to just quickly answer the questions in the paper. I know I'm straying a little from solving the paper, but this is important from my experience. So I want you to know. One, when you just want to memorize and write things, you find the subject very heavy and boring. And then you end up saying, oh, psychology is not interesting at all. We thought it would be this, but actually it's this. It could be because of poor study habits which you're showing, just trying to memorize everything. So don't make the subject a burden on yourself by all the time just trying to rote learn everything. Secondly, when you don't practice research methods enough, in fact, you are losing out on an opportunity to score very easily in the paper. It's just a matter of practice, which is interesting to do, and secondly, easy to score on. So why are you leaving something which is in fact going to take your marks towards A star, just because initially it's seeming to be difficult, so you're procrastinating and letting it go? Don't do that. Make sure from time to time, when you are practicing for A-level psychology, you keep on practicing the research methods questions. Trust me, you'll enjoy it if you overcome the initial hesitation which you have, and it will be a section that you will look forward to in the paper. There's a very set pattern actually. Once you practice a few questions, you realize that the way of answering them is pretty repetitive. It is enjoyable nevertheless, but there is a particular format that you have to keep following. So that is why, there's no big deal to it. It might seem, oh, it's scary. Some school teachers say also research methods is, where students don't score. And don't get into all that. In fact, it is the one, which you will feel, oh, this is really easy to do once you practice a little. So here the question they have asked is to conduct the observation of mother-infant pairs. The researchers needed examples of reciprocal behaviors that they could record. I'm sure this is reminding you of, say, Shaffer and Emerson and those type of studies. Suggest two examples of reciprocal behaviors that could be used as behavioral categories in the study. Okay, these type of questions come frequently in research methods. Some larger behavior area will be specified, and then you have to create categories. Basically, they want you to operationalize those. So they don't want you to operationalize as of now. They want you to give examples of behaviors that could be seen by the researchers and marked on their checklist. That is what they want. 2 marks, 2 examples, meaning 1 mark per example. Like I told you, very easy to score if you could just come up with an accurate example. Just for that, you get 1 mark. The most common mistake here is to give something that is unobservable. I'll give you an example. They want to record reciprocal behaviors on their checklist. Now, a student might write something like, the mother is feeling happy, so the child is also feeling happy. That is an example of reciprocity. So on their checklist, they could write feeling happy. When it comes to observation, if you've learned it correctly in research methods, you know that we cannot directly observe someone's feelings. The mother is feeling happy or not, the infant is feeling happy or not. How do we know? Observation cannot be done on inward behaviors or feelings. It has to be done on outward behaviors. So you have to make sure you write something that can be directly seen or observed by the researchers and recorded on their checklist. Then it's simple. Now you've learned so much about reciprocity in the textbook. So I think the simplest example that would come to your mind is smiling. The caregiver smiles and the infant smiles in return. That could be one behavioral category. Actually, behavioral category is the largest set within which some specific examples are there. So I would recommend you name the category and give examples of behavior within that. But even if you just say smiling, like even if you just give the example of behavior without giving the category, even that gets you marks, full marks. Okay, so smiling is something that could be observed for reciprocation, or some sort of, say, stroking. The mother strokes the infant's hand and then the infant strokes her hand in return. Stroking could be there. Tongue protrusion. The mother playfully puts out her tongue in front of the infant, and the infant also returns with the same. So many possible behaviors are there. For more ideas on what you could write, just revise what you've learned as examples in reciprocity or any study that you have seen. What I would put, like my examples would be, like I told you, I would like to give the category and the behavior within that. So I would give one category as imitation of facial expressions. Within that, I would give examples like, say, smiling, tongue protrusion, etc. And I would give another category as I had mentioned, imitation of touching or reciprocation of touching. So this would include like stroking the palm, something like that. Okay, like I told you, I like to take categories literally, so I like to present that this is the broad category, and within that, these are the behaviors. But even if you just give this smiling, tongue protrusion, and stroking the palm, or means you have to give any two. These are three as such. Any two of these, you will get 2 marks for that. So it's on your writing style. They have just asked you for 2 examples. They will give you 2 marks. You don't need to operationalize them. Otherwise, they would have said operationalize, or at least they would have allotted 4 marks. So it would be something like smiling, operational definition, and touching, operational definition, that way. Usually those questions are separately. So I do expect it to come below. It's come indirectly below. So that's why I don't give it here, because then it will be overlapping also with something you have to give later, and it will waste your time to operationalize here. Next question is, outline one way in which reciprocal behaviors could be sampled in this study. Now, this is also like research methods, like I told you, once you've done it, you've seen it all. So this sampling question also comes very frequently. Here the most common mistake is because students are underprepared. Sampling, they still make a major goof up of assuming it is the sampling from the population. Here they're asking you about observation and they're asking you how a behavior could be sampled. They're not asking you how participants could be selected for the study. So first thing, if it is coming to your mind that sampled is the word used, so I must think about random sampling, volunteer sampling, opportunity. That's not the type of sampling they're asking you for. They're asking you about observational sampling of behavior. So you need to think about only two possibilities: time sampling and event sampling. Both are equally correct. It's not that one of them is the correct answer. So take any one and explain it correctly to get 2 marks. This is an outline question. All research methods question, I forgot to mention before, they are AO2 because you're applying to a situation given. So this is also AO2. Because it is AO2, you need to keep linking to the stem which is given. Otherwise, you don't get marks. So if supposing I say event sampling should be done, event sampling means that whenever a behavior occurs, then recording is done on the checklist. I'll just get 1 mark because despite my definition being correct, I have treated it as if it's an AO1 question. I have not linked to the situation at all. I have to treat it as an AO2 question. That is what it is to get 2 marks. Okay, so regardless if I give event or time sampling, I'm not to give general definition. I'm to link it with reciprocal behaviors, which the researchers are observing in this case. So that's one. Second thing is it's for 2 marks. So let's consider how the marks are distributed. One is for naming a correct technique, either event or time. Second is for linking it to the situation. Now, how do you link? As I've said so many times, even in the previous part, use wording from the stem which is given. So talk about reciprocity. Still, if it seems difficult to you, event sampling could be done because this is what could be observed, this behavior. That because term, many students find it easy. So use that conjunction because and try to link it to the situation. So second mark is for linking. Let me make it explicit by making an outline. So my first point, say, could be time sampling. Okay, if I give time sampling in the case of the situation given, the situation is very minimum, but it talks about reciprocity between mother and infant. So how time sampling could be done for that? That needs to be my second point. So any time duration I can take, just make it specific. Don't give vague things. So something like, let's say every 30 seconds, the researcher could record on the checklist whether any reciprocal behaviors are taking place between the mother and the infant. So you use words like reciprocal, mother, infant and all to connect to what is given. So that way time sampling. Alternatively, you could take event sampling like I said. Don't take both, take any one. They've asked for one way. So I'm giving you both possibilities, but you're not to write both. Event sampling, you could just say every time a reciprocal behavior occurs from the checklist, it could be marked off on the checklist. So that is event sampling. I hope you can see I've not given general definitions. I've spoken about both the concepts, whichever I give, in context of what is given in the situation. Next is a statistics type question, but looking simple. The two researchers compared their data to assess inter-observer reliability. This produced a correlation coefficient of plus 0.26. Briefly explain what a correlation coefficient of plus 0.26 means in terms of the reliability of the two observations. When it comes to inter-observer reliability, you know that you need a kappa of at least plus 0.8 for it to be considered that there has been inter-observer reliability. This is way less than that. So firstly, you know that inter-observer reliability is poor. But the way of getting marks is to explain it correctly in the paper. So let's consider how we can explain it. Briefly explain, again it's AO2. Like I told you, all these research methods questions are AO2. 2 marks are there, you'll have to give 2 points. First is to explain whether this is a strong or weak correlation, that way, interpreting the coefficient, because they've emphasized so much on the number of the coefficient, like they've given it very prominently. So just interpret what the coefficient is. Then next point is for relating it with inter-observer reliability, like actually answering the question and saying what it says about inter-observer reliability. Most common mistake here is not to link back to the question, just to stray away. So most students will say, it is plus 0.26, it's a weak correlation because it's closer to 0 than to 1. It's positive, but it is not strong enough. Okay, but they've asked you what does it tell you about inter-observer reliability. That question you can't leave it unanswered. That's why first interpret what the coefficient it is, a weak or strong, but then get back to whether it indicates reliability or not. Okay, so don't skip the second part. Okay, so what we can say here is first, it is a positive or direct but weak correlation, indicating that agreement between the researchers about which behaviors are reciprocal, which are not, is low, it is poor. In terms of inter-observer reliability, since a reliability coefficient of plus 0.8 or above is the standard for considering that inter-observer reliability is high, this suggests that inter-observer reliability is poor. So given this reference, it suggests that inter-observer reliability is poor. Okay, so this is how you have to explain. I want to remind you, if you still need to see model answers in front of you because you need to see complete sentences, how they are written, you can download from my website, the link for which I've given in the description box below. The full answers are there as you have to write in the exam paper. Okay, next question is outline one way in which reliability of the two researchers could be improved. We have just seen the reliability was poor. So now they want us to suggest how it could be improved. Again, a very frequent question. So if you've practiced, it'll be so easy to score here. It's for 2 marks. How you can divide your points for the 2 marks is, first give a suggestion. Name like this is what can be done. And then again link it to the situation, like specify exactly how it could be done given reciprocity. I would suggest give some example. Your operationalization could help you, which we were seeing earlier, should we operationalize or not. These type of questions, operationalization can help. I'll tell you which suggestion you could give in which you could include operationalization. Okay, first let's brainstorm over what suggestions we can give. To improve reliability, 2 or 3 things which can be done. One, which comes to my mind, is operationalizing correctly. Behaviors should be so defined in measurable terms that there is no confusion left between researchers as to which they should mark on the checklist and which they shouldn't. So very precise measurable terms behavior should be given. Second point could be an example of one behavior which is like thoroughly operationalized. Another possibility of increasing reliability is for the researchers to have a meeting before conducting the observation, and for senior researchers to train junior researchers in those meetings. So training can be provided to novice observers so that they understand exactly how to implement using the checklist. Again, you can give some example for reciprocity. So this is one behavior, the definition of which they could be explained in this way. Another way of increasing reliability would be to say video record the behaviors and then watch them multiple times, rewinding, forwarding, like going back, going forward into the video as many times as is necessary, so that if there are any confusions or discrepancies about the behaviors can be re-watched and the researchers can, mark them off on their checklist after due consideration. Or you could even suggest in the same line that whenever there are discrepancies, both can sit together, watch a video, and then come to a common consensus of whether they will consider this behavior as being reciprocal or not. So, mutual resolving of discrepancies can take place between the researchers. So, anything like that you can suggest. Now, the one which I'm taking for to give you an example is the operationalization one. So, first point would be the suggestion, I'll name it, that there should be clear or thorough operationalization of every behavior on the checklist. Then I just give an example, easy way to get 2 marks. For example, let's say if tongue protrusion is one of the behaviors, or I can take one which I have suggested earlier, say smiling. It could be so operationalized as, if it's tongue protrusion, I can remember, I think it was the Schaffer and Emerson study. In that, the tongue coming out beyond the edge of the lower lip is considered to be trunk protrusion. So if it is operationalized to this extent, there won't be any confusion. The researcher can't understand the trunk is being protruded or not. That question is not there because it's been defined to this extent that it has to cross this boundary. So then there won't be any problems in agreement. Alternatively, if I'm taking smiling, because I've given that before, again something like say 10 degrees, the lip should turn upwards, uh, and say cheeks, the cheek should go upwards as well. They should also enhance. That is considered as smiling. So something like that would give such a measurable definition that there will be agreement between researchers whether behavior should be counted or not. Okay, let's look at the next question. Outline the findings of one animal study of attachment. There are lots of animal studies, but I think most of you must have looked at Lorenz and Harlow. Those are the syllabus ones and they are the most popular. When they say findings of the study and outline, okay, firstly, the question which we were doing earlier, that is completed now, the scenario. So now we have again to consider the assessment objectives. We can't take for granted that now all are AO2. This is, for example, AO1. So AO1 command term is there, they've asked for findings. The most common mistake is despite seeing the word findings mentioned prominently, some students will give aim, procedure or conclusion of the study. None of that has been asked. So don't be in a haste. Don't just see, okay, animal study of attachment. Okay, I know Lawrence, this was the aim, this was the procedure, this was the results. You'll get credit only for the results. So maybe only 1 mark. So if you read carefully and you realize, oh, I have to give only the results, then you'll be able to justify only results for 3 marks. If you're writing aim, procedure, conclusion, any of that, that's not going to be credited at all. Okay, now before you write, 2 studies are there, think which one you can write better for the findings. If you take Lorenz, for example, to justify 3 marks for any, you'll have to give 3 unique points for the results. As I had mentioned in the previous part of the video, 3 unique points means 3 different points. It should not be the same finding you're repeating in 3 different wording. Okay, so for Lorenz, findings could be the babies who were hatched by the mother goose, they tended to follow her, they imprinted on her. So one finding could be about mother goose. The second finding could be about the babies who were hatched in the incubator, they followed Lorenz or they imprinted on Lorenz. And one more finding could be, because I need to justify 3 marks, this will get me only 2 marks. Literally in these type of questions, they count how many points you've given rather than using a rubric. So a third point could be about the sexual imprinting, which Lorenz had seen. He had done long-term follow-up of the geese, in which he found that to whichever figure the geese have been imprinted in infancy, that is the figure only to which they sexually imprint in future. For example, if they've been imprinted on Lorenz, then they desire to mate with a human being rather than with animals. So 3 findings, 3 marks, as simple as that. Just notice in all I've given finding or result. I've not given aim, why he did the study, what he did in the study, or what he interpreted from the study about attachment, nothing like that I have given. Now if I choose to give Harlow instead, again many possibilities are there. One could be, finding could be that the monkeys who were reared with only the wire mother, they showed poor emotional bonding or poor, what we say, attachment with the wire mother. They showed poor development of attachment basically. Those who were uh, brought up by the, so to say, by the contact comfort mother, the blanket cloth mother, they showed stronger attachment. In Harlow, there are a lot of possibilities because there were multiple groups. There were 4 groups of monkeys. So you could also talk about the mixed groups which were there. For example, you could say that those who were bred by the wire mother but had an opportunity to feed on the cloth mother, they always went to the cloth mother whenever they needed comfort. They preferred to be with the cloth mother. Whereas those who were reared by the cloth mother, anyways, they preferred to go to the cloth mother only, even if they were being fed by the wire mother. So those findings could be there. Also in Harlow, that predatory part which is there, he used to introduce a predator from time to time to scare off the monkeys. And whenever he introduced the predator, no matter which group the monkeys came from, they would rush towards the cloth mother for comfort. Definitely, that could be one finding. There are some extensions also of Hollow study. Those are also animal studies. You could take any of those. So, in some of his extensions, he has shown, for example, in the long term, monkeys who are deprived of attachment with their real mother in infancy, they go on to become very hostile and violent, and they tend to abuse their own children to very gory and brutal extents. Those could also be some of the points. In fact, I've noticed in many schools, those studies are discussed a lot about Harlow because that's the first thing that comes to students' minds when I ask them. So they tell me about that study of Harlow in which it is shown that in later life as mothers, the monkeys who have been deprived themselves, they become hostile to the point of killing their own children. So definitely you could give that also as a finding. Okay, so I've brainstormed so many possibilities with you. I'll just make a quick outline. For the Lorenz study, I find that simpler. We could give 1 point on the geese being imprinted on the mother, following their mother as the first moving object. Those being imprinted on Lorenz, following him, who were hatched in the incubator, they followed him. So that becomes the second result. And finally, like I told you, about the future sexual imprinting, wanting to mate with humans if they had been interpreted on a human being like Lorenz. So as simple as that, that can fetch 3 marks. Sometimes students feel, oh, it's so difficult, that sometimes they ask you only about the procedure, only about the findings. But just think about it. Was it difficult to answer this? It's just a matter of focus. It's not about difficulty. It's just a matter of being careful about, okay, this is what is asked in the question, like findings is what is asked. So I must not deviate from that. That's all. It's not difficult. Okay, next is outline one limitation of the study you have referred to in your answer to the question. Okay, I know one common limitation that you could give for any animal study, Lorenz, Harlow, any other, is extrapolation. So that is the first one which must be coming to your mind. It is difficult to generalize to human beings. Now, when that thing comes to your mind, don't get overconfident and just write. I'll tell you how students will write. It's difficult to generalize to humans. Animals and humans are different. So, whatever is found about attachment in animals would not generalize to humans. This is a very generic answer. Don't answer like this. Once you have thought of a point, extrapolation has come to your mind, start making it specific to the study which you have given. Don't give generic answers because they have told you also explicitly and it's understood of the study that you have given in the previous. So if you're saying, for example, from Lorenz study, we cannot extrapolate to humans. Why? What is there about his study that cannot be generalized to humans? Humans are not mobile when they are born. They cannot move and go behind a mother. So direct generalizability is not possible of imprinting in humans. Besides, in humans, attachment means emotional bonding, like we are seeing from the beginning. More of emotional bonding rather than physical bonding. Whereas his studies seem to be more at a physiological level. So these are the reasons why they would not generalize to humans. Similarly, if I take for Harlow, again, generalizability, why Harlow study is not generalizable is because, sorry, when it comes to humans, the mother who is feeding is going to be the one which is going to show warmth or emotional bonding as well. So this type of separation of one mother just doing the feeding and one mother just providing contact comfort is very unlikely, because even if humans have nannies, they do provide contact comfort as well. It's not that they just provide feeding to the baby. So the situations which human beings are in are very different from which monkeys were in this study. Or you could also talk about the same similar thing as of Florence, very simple creatures. Just like birds are very simple creatures, so are monkeys. So if they are desiring feeding from their mother, and that's why they are feeling comfortable just because of a tactile response, that touch feeling which they are getting from the cloth, that is not the same as a human being feeling emotional bonding with their mother. It's not just about tactile comfort. When it comes to humans, it's at a very deeper emotional level. So it's not comparable to what monkeys are feeling upon touch. In humans, it's also about the psychological sharing of emotions that takes place between the mother and the baby, the trust which is there, or the sense of warmth which is there from the mother at the mental level, the sense of security which is there. Those are psychological experiences unlikely to be felt by monkeys. Why I've discussed this extrapolation point so elaborately is because I know most of you will want to take that. But there are other limitations also that are possible. Another limitation could be, besides extrapolation, let's brainstorm, any study or theory that goes counter to what is proposed by Harlow and Lorenz. For example, Lorenz has kind of supported Bowlby's theory, which is a sin. Bowlby was inspired by Lorenz in terms of indiscriminate attachment, and Shaffer and Emerson have also shown that, and the need to bond with one particular primary caregiver. In fact, even the critical period that Lorenz has given matches with what Bowlby has given for humans. Those are strengths, but then counters come from other theories or other studies in the area, so that will help you to think of weaknesses. For example, many researchers have shown that multiple attachments are possible. It's not that indiscriminate attachment has to be there. So, for example, in collectivist cultures especially, there are multiple attachments with grandparents, parents, nannies, and uncles and aunts and so forth, just because the kins and the communities are larger. So that contrasts what Lorenz has said as well, or even what Harlow has said. For example, even he has proposed that bonding with the mother is very important. So it goes against. Even if we take critical periods, which are also suggested in both Harlow and Lorenz, so whichever you're taking, there are studies to prove that critical periods are actually sensitive periods. They are not irreversible. Even if the child has not got enough attention in the critical period, they can compensate for it later on. So right now, I'm not there too many studies actually and theories around critical and sensitive periods. I'm not able to bring one particular to mind, but whichever is there in your mind, you could give that. Another limitation which comes to my mind is uh, related to this only, the irreversibility, like sensitive period. Guitton's study, I think that is a very good example. In fact, he has shown that imprinting per se can be reversed. Till now, what I told you is about how lack of attachment can be reversed. But even if directly we take Lorenz's concept of imprinting, even that can be reversed. That is what Guitton showed in the rubber glove study. So any of these points you could take for limitation, and also any methodological flaws with the study. Like, this question has a very broad scope. For example, the number of monkeys were very small in Harlow's study, or in Lorenz's study also the number of geese was very small. So sampling issues, ethical issues, besides methodological issues, you could take those also. So in terms of ethical issues, cruelty towards monkeys in Harlow's case, especially the extended studies in which the rape rack was created, or mothers were seen observed like killing their own kin and all those type of things, you could take for ethical issues. So lots of possibilities are there. The key thing is that in structuring the answer, you need to follow the peel format. As I had said in the last part also, there was the 6 marker, 1 limitation, 1 strength. So just follow the peel format, because even when you write for 16 marks, it's about 3 to 4 marks that you give as a peel point. So here also, when it's come for 3 marks, give it in the peel format to score full 3. Here, because it's not AO1, it is AO3 evaluation question, I would suggest that rather than trying to come up with 3 points, try to follow context and reasoning. Simply saying the peel format, try to follow that to score well. If you need to know more about the peel format or how to give context and reasoning in answers, it's beyond the scope of this lesson, but it is available in my previous videos. So in which I have taken 16 markers for answering, one full video on a 16 marker. You can see any of those videos to know how to structure your evaluation points. As I told you, I think really that rubber glove study is a very good example. So my point for the limitation would be that imprinting is reversible unlike what Lorenz suggested. So in Guitton's study, that would be my elaboration. He first took these yellow chicks and he imprinted them on yellow rubber gloves. They got imprinted on it. And as expected, they did show preference for the rubber glove, even when it came to sexual imprinting. Later, they wanted to mate with the rubber glove. So everything was going in accordance with what Lorentz had proposed. But then comes the twist in his study. He exposed the chicks to their own species for some time. And once they were exposed to their own species, then they wanted to mate with other chickens only, not with the rubber glove. Meaning that he proved that indeed it is reversible. The imprinting that has taken place once can be undone also, which is what Lorentz had not shown. He had insisted that imprinting is permanent. He had not tried to investigate whether it could be reversed, and because he was not of the opinion that it could be reversed. So in the link, it's always necessary to link back to explicitly what is asked in the question. So the limitation of Lorentz study because of this is that it challenges the view of Lorentz that imprinting is irreversible. Okay, and quickly let's come to discuss findings from studies that have investigated role of the father in attachment, the 8 marker. Okay, when it comes to this one, it is AO1 for 3 marks and AO3 for 5 marks. This is exactly the half down version of a 16 mark. So AO1 goes from 6 to 3 and AO3 goes from 10 to 5. Very specific question this time. If you read it, discuss the findings of studies. Otherwise, generally they say research and then you're free to take studies or theories. Here you will have to take studies because they have mentioned that. Also again, findings. So make sure your AO1 is not rambling around aim, procedure, conclusions. They have asked for findings specifically. So make sure you focus only on the findings. Even your AO3 should amount to evaluation of the studies or their findings. So be very focused to be able to score full 8 marks. Otherwise, you'll go lower on the mark band. Also, it's not necessary. I know the first thing coming to mind is I can't remember the names of all the researchers who have done their studies. You don't have to. You just have to give the findings. So names are not important. If you can, good. If you can't remember, that's fine. Another thing that will come to your mind is, do I have to know numerical findings and all? No, you have to know broad trends. Sometimes you get panicky because when you see the word studies, it makes you feel, oh, I have to memorize each and every study, which is not the requirement. So don't go into panic. Think carefully about what they're asking you. They are not asking you to memorize and write anything. What they want is that you should give what we have learned from these studies actually. Those are the findings. So whatever you've learned about role of the father, like see, for example, if I brainstorm quickly, you've learned that fathers can be playmates rather than emotional support, which mothers are. That's a finding from some study after all. So even if you can't remember the name of the researcher, or you can't even remember what was done in the study in which they found this, that fathers can be playmates, still it is a finding of a study. That's what they're asking you to give, and you can get full marks for giving that. So it is not as challenging the question as it appears to be. It's more or less what we've learned theoretically in the book. You have to give that only because theories are also emerging from studies. So you must have learned that fathers can serve as playmates if single parent families are there. Then fathers in fact are capable of providing emotional bonding as well. They can substitute mothers. It is also found that in earlier classic studies, fathers' roles were not found to be very prominent because of they would not give enough time. That was the cultural expectation that fathers don't have to take care of babies, or they were not as emotionally sensitive earlier. Whereas recent studies are showing that they've become increasingly emotionally sensitive, given better parenting education, and fathers practically having to take on the role of mothers given new types of families that are emerging, single parent, separated families, or homosexual families, step families, those type of things. So any such findings which you have learned, you have to give. It's not about being able to quote exact studies and showing that I know the name of the researchers and the years. That's not a requirement at all. So let's make the AO1 outline first. For AO1, restricting myself to 3 marks, not going overboard, I would give firstly some classic study findings, the easiest of which is Schaffer and Emerson. Where you know names, do write them. Where you don't know, don't write them. That's okay. But if you know a name, don't omit it unnecessarily. They found that fathers are generally not the primary caregivers. I hope you can see that despite knowing thoroughly Schaffer and Emerson's procedure, I'm not giving that. Of course, all of us know it because it's a case study, because they've asked for findings. When we want to score in the top mark band, the number one requirement is being focused on the question, being relevant to the question. So when they ask me for findings, I give only findings. So fathers were generally not primary caregivers, and this was because they do not give enough time to the caregiving responsibility. Some other studies supported this. Herman et al. Had supported this. They had shown that fathers are less emotionally sensitive also. Are not able to pick up social releasing cues from their babies. So besides lack of time, Herman et al. Proposed that this is also one reason why fathers tend not to be the primary caregivers. But even at that time, even in early research, they were contradicted by findings like Fraudy et al., which showed that at least when it comes to physiological sensitivity, definitely fathers are as capable as mothers. They can also pick up physiological cues of distress from the children, even if emotionally they are not able to identify too many cues. That is what Fraudy et al. Had shown. So, one quick section I would give on classic studies, and another quick section I would give on later studies or recent studies. Not very recent, but what they've shown after these classic studies. So, the most popular one, Geiger's study, in which he showed that fathers tend to be playmates, energetic type of caregivers, and that is important for the development of physical activity, energy, and the fun side of children, of enjoyability and taking interest in hobbies. That is what is helped by having a father as a caregiver. And then, in fact, like I told you earlier, researchers like Lamb, they have shown that if required in single parent families, not only fathers can be playmates, but they can also be primary emotional caregivers to the children in the absence of the mother. So these type of points we can give. Of course, there are just too many studies, lots of possibilities of what you could cover besides this. If you need to know what should be your targeted word count in an 8 marker for AO1, AO3, and more such tips on exactly how arrangement, organization, and all is being done, in the documents that I have linked below with the model answers, I have given examiner commentary as well. So there are also comments or feedback running throughout the document, bringing your attention to how answers have been structured, what word count has been targeted, what content has been covered. So they are not only model answers, they also advise on how to write your answers beyond what I'm giving in this video. So definitely consider purchasing those documents from below. Okay, now coming to the AO3 part. When it comes to strengths of the studies done on fathers, I would say the number one strength is practical application. I'm sure most of you are thinking of that. These studies have shown that father's role is very vital in the upbringing of children. Further studies have shown that if fathers are good caregivers to their children, in that case, children tend to be out of problems in school, and they tend to be more active, more well connected with their peers. So these type of studies, because they took the initiative to give importance to the father's role, which was being neglected earlier, they have enabled such application. So that's a merit of these studies. Besides that, you could even take any particular study and bring about strengths in its methodology or ethics or anything like that. Even that is good evaluation. Just stay focused on evaluating the studies. So, for example, you could say studies like Schaffer and Emerson, they were very realistic. They actually recorded behaviors between caregivers and infants in the homes of the infants. So ecological validity is there to support the fact that fathers give less time, or at least at that time they used to give less time to their children at the time when the classic studies were done, which is a strength because they are realistic. So of course you can elaborate in peel format. I'm not writing that much, but when I say practical application, the study I gave you as an example, that it helps children to stay out of trouble in school, that would be my elaboration here. And also I just remember this study which shows that it helps mothers also, because these studies have brought about the role of the father in being a caregiver, and the extent to which that can contribute to upbringing the infant. Mothers have become less stressed, fathers have started taking more initiative. So it's been helpful for mothers to garner back their strength in terms of self-esteem, and to get time off from work, because this has become mainstream because of such studies. So that is a very big merit, the impact created on society. You can even relate it to socially sensitive research if you are at A levels. So any such strength you can give. Uh, like I said, for individual studies, any ethical concerns and all, uh, in terms of strengths, good ethics have been taken care of, or weaknesses, even that is fine. Right now, I can't think of that. Also, I need to be a little quick in this video. Coming to weaknesses of the studies, the number one weakness which comes to my mind is these are correlational studies and very overgeneralized. The truth of society is that when it comes to fathers' role, especially in modern society, it is very diversified. There are fathers who are in homosexual relations, so there are two men caregivers, both are fathers of a baby. So there, what role the father plays as a caregiver, versus where it is a traditional heterosexual family where there is a father and mother. There, what role the father plays. When it's a single father, what role he plays. When he's with a partner who's taking care, what role he plays. There's too much diversity to take any one study and try to generalize to all of these different settings in which fathers have to play a role. So, in terms of generalizability, they might be too broadly generalized, which is a weakness. Besides that, in terms of if I have to think methodological concerns with these studies, they are mostly correlational. Like if I take something like Schaffer and Emerson, they are just seeing correlationally in the real world that okay, fathers are not giving enough time to the babies. But are they proving to be primary caregivers or not? What is the quality of their interaction with the children? There's no manipulation of that, and not enough detailed study of that because the focus was actually on mother child relationships of those studies. So having that sort of methodology and then trying to say that fathers are not primary caregivers could be a weakness. Or like I said, there could be other confounding variables and only a correlational relationship is being overgeneralized. That could be a weakness. And of course, any socially sensitive ethical type of concerns. Ethical issues are not only to do with the procedure of study, even implications for larger societies. So earlier studies which said that fathers are not playing a dominant role could have been discouraging for fathers in caregiving relations. So that could have been a socially sensitive area. Or today it might be that fathers, in terms of modern research, are feeling pressurized to take on the role of mothers because that is being suggested in the studies. Again, social sensitivity. So anything like that you could give. Just stay focused in both AO1 and AO3 to be able to get in the full 8-mark band. The moment you stray away and start giving general points, anything to do with role of father rather than study related description or evaluation, you will start losing marks. Let's come to the psychopathology section now. What I see in most students is you find attachment a little more difficult. So I think it's good we've discussed it more in more details. Whatever I have said about attachment, how to answer certain type of questions and all, everything will apply to psychopathology as well. So I'll try to be less repetitive here. Whatever is new that's coming here in how to interpret the questions, I'll try to focus more on that. Okay, so in psychopathology, the first question is an MCQ type, which is good. There are 4 definitions of abnormality. Which of the 4 definitions of abnormality would be best applied? I'm sorry, to the examples A, B, C, and D below. Write a different definition of abnormality for each example. They want you to write the definition. Just take note of that. Okay. So not only you have to name that this is the definition, say deviation from statistical norms, you have to define it also. Also keep in mind that it is for 4 marks. So it's going to be like one definition, second, third, of course, matching. It has to match with the example given, otherwise you won't get marks. But don't try to make it applicative and don't try to extend it to the point that it becomes 8 marks. Stay focused on just giving the definition in one line. Because how much can you give for 4 marks? One line per definition should be enough. Let's see the first option. A person with a phobia of buttons perceiving buttons to be much larger and more threatening than they actually are. I know most of you know the answers directly, but if you are not able to, how you can do a run through in your mind is, in your mind, or you're allowed to write in rough, just note down which are the 4 definitions. Deviation from social norms, deviation from statistical norms or statistical infrequency, whichever way you have learned it, failure to function adequately, the Rosenhan Seligman one, or Jahodas, deviation from ideal mental health, right? Now, uh, just keep this in front of you on the screen of your mind and think about if a person is perceiving buttons to be much larger than they are. What sort of a mistake is he making? You, if you can't think of it, I know it's obvious by now, but then just rule out the possibilities which don't apply. Is it statistical infrequency? No, it's not something rare. At least they've not said that it's something rare, so they're not hinting towards that. Is it a social norm that we should not perceive buttons to be large? No, so not deviation from social norms. Is the person's productivity getting hampered in any way? No indication of that. Like, they're not suggesting he's become obsessed with buttons and he can't do anything else. So definitely deviation from ideal mental health. So if you're not able to come to the answer directly, you can narrow down this way, like I've just demonstrated. So for A, it is deviation from ideal mental health. Why is that the case? I'm just explaining to you, though you don't need to write. In deviation from ideal mental health, there is a criterion that there should be adequate or accurate perception of reality. If I think that buttons are much larger than what they really are, I have lost my sense or perception of reality. So that is why it matches this definition. When I'm writing in the paper, I just have to say deviation from ideal mental health, because one parameter or criterion of realistic or normal perception is being defined. When it is defined, it is considered to be abnormal behavior. I don't need to link it to what is given. Next, they have given a person with phobia of buttons struggling to cope with working in an office where there could be lots of people wearing buttoned shirts. The key thing here is struggling to work in the office. That is failure to function adequately. It's actually hampering the person's functioning. You can rule out the other possibilities like I did for the first one. You'll find that this does not fit into any other definition. So, what is failure to function adequately? Generally, what is its definition? Becoming unproductive, not being able to cope or deal with environmental demands because of this feeling overwhelmed in the situation by some, being distracted by some factor like that. So that definition you can give here. I explained to you why it's linking to the situation, but you don't need to mention that. The next one, a phobia of buttons is not regarded as expected behavior within a society. This is deviation from social norms. It seems that there is some expectation in society that people should not perceive buttons to be larger than they are and they should not be phobic of them. So expectations of society are violated. That is called deviation from norms, social norms. That's the definition. Write perfectly. I made the mistake of not writing the word social. Make sure you use exact terminology. Okay, finally the D one. We know it will be statistical infrequency, but let's be sure. Less than 0.1% of the UK population has a phobia of buttons. This is definitely statistical infrequency. It seems to be a very rare condition. Whatever is rare is abnormal according to this definition. For my understanding, if I apply it to this situation, less than 0.1% having button phobia means hardly anyone has it in the UK. So that is why it is qualifying for statistical infrequency. Okay, that was a very simple one, highly scoring, like 4 marks secure. Now let's look at outline Ellis's ABC model of depression. This is purely AO1. No STEM is there for AO2. And no strengths weaknesses are asked for. 4 marks, 4 unique points. Very easy ABC model. If you just explain what's A, B and C, easily you will cover 4 unique points. So let's do this very quickly. There's nothing to brainstorm because there are not many possibilities of what you could answer here. It's a very fixed answer. ABC has a very specific meaning that you will have to explain. I would begin by saying, because it's model of depression, for a good entry in one line, I would say Ellis attributes depression to irrational beliefs, basically unrealistic and illogical beliefs. And then I would say that according to him, it's a process or a procedure whereby these beliefs are triggered and they result in depression. The process begins with an activating event A, whereby something happens in the environment that triggers irrational beliefs in an individual. I could give a very quick example, like those 2-3 word type of examples, because it's only 4 marks, not 6 marks. So, for example, someone breaks up with their long term boyfriend or girlfriend, that way. Next comes in the irrational belief, denoted as B. This is when some sort of must, should type of masturbatory belief gets triggered in the person, such as my relationships must always be perfect. And then this leads to emotional and behavioral consequences of depressive symptoms. C. For example, the person starts experiencing a very low mood and refuses to interact with other friends or relatives, which indicates that depression has onset. So, this is how you could give this answer. I think this is very straightforward. I don't think students make many mistakes in this. The only thing is not using good terminology. That can be a problem. Or not using terms despite it being ABC, like activating event, irrational beliefs, or confusing with Beck's terminology. So, talking about cognitive distortions instead of irrational beliefs, or not defining clearly what the concepts are. Mainly AO1 type of errors are highly possible. Students know what is ABC, make sure you explain it with good terminology. And of course, if you need more help with that, you can download the model answers below, in which I've written perfectly as you have to write for the exam with good terminology. So now there's a last question to discuss. I remember this took some students by surprise. Why? Because of course they were prepared for both. It's just that the combination took them by surprise. In this one question, they've asked for both, which is very logical actually. They've asked for the neural explanation of OCD and drug therapy. Why I'm saying it's logical is because they align to each other. The drug therapy is coming from the neural explanation, so it makes perfect sense to place them together. It's just that this time, even that studies role of father and this one, students sometimes don't expect these type of questions. They expect very straightforward. As I told you, for the role of father questions, sometimes you just feel that something is very challenging. It's not really. Like in that, I told you the way of asking the question was studies of father, but it's what you have learned in the syllabus only. It's actually not different in practice. Same thing here. Just because they've combined neural and drug therapy doesn't mean you don't know the answer, because the wording looks little obscure. It's not obscure, like I told you, actually it's logical. And you know both. You just have to club both together, just intertwine both together. That's all that's required. That's the only skill that's required. As such, you know the base of what you have to cover in this. So don't become unnecessarily panicky. It's actually a very easy question to answer. Some students who are like very underprepared might make this mistake of not understanding what is neural explanation. Like neural means has to really be parts of the brain. Of course, neurotransmitters also come within neural explanation. So make sure you keep that in sight, because after all, that is linked to drug therapy, neurotransmitters. That is the more important part. Of course, you can get high marks even if you don't talk about the neurotransmitters and you just talk about parts of the brain. But I am always trying to get you to your full marks possible, 16 marks. So when you want to write a very integrated 16 marks type of answer which really justifies getting that high range, then make sure you're bringing in neurotransmitters and linking to drug therapy, making it a very coherent answer. So from that point of view, I will explain to you how to write. Most of what I've said in the 8 marker for attachment applies here, but still very quickly, I'll just draw your attention to some things about this question. One, the discuss command term is both AO1 and AO3. These are basics. And AO1 is for 6 marks because it's a 16 marker. There's no STEM. So AO3 is there. There's no AO2. AO3 gets full 10 marks. Both two things are asked, which is little uncommon for a 16 marker, but here there are two, neural explanation and drug therapy. Make sure to balance equally between both. All my suggestions are from gaining full 16 marks point of view. So keep an equal balance in both the topics for both AO1 and AO3. So make sure description is also justifying both and evaluation is also for both. Don't neglect any while doing the description or evaluation. I would give an easy means of going about it in practice. Just assume in AO1 both are worth 3 marks. Dedicate one paragraph to each. Your word count or your number of sentences equally divided between the two. What word count and all you can see in the document below. AO3 also Strengths and weaknesses, in fact, I'll show you a way of integrating it also, but make sure you give equal numbers of strengths and weaknesses from both to maintain a balance overall in evaluation, both strengths and weaknesses, and between these two, neural explanations and drug therapy. Let's see my suggested answer for what you could write for AO1. I would begin with the neurotransmitters part of the neural explanation. So I would explain the role of serotonin. When serotonin levels are reduced, that results in OCD along with depression, and this is found through animal studies whereby when serotonin levels are artificially reduced in their brains through manipulation, they start showing symptoms of OCD. That is what these animals start doing is they uh, this thing start showing compulsive type of repetitive actions basically, and of course they can't have OCD. They are not humans, so animals cannot have OCD. But those ritualistic type of behaviors, repetitive, compulsive type of behaviors at that level, they start showing at their level. So indicates that could be that serotonin could be playing a role in OCD, which also reminds me of dopamine. When dopamine is increased, that also results in the same effect. More so when dopamine is increased, repetitive movements in animals like rat studies have been done, so indicating that because of, after all, dopamine is a movement neurotransmitter, excitatory, so that is the effect it has on the animal's brain. Then after the neurotransmitters, of course in the answer I write it for longer, right now I'm just discussing. One more we could add is antidepressant studies. For the serotonin role, besides these animal studies, there have been these antidepressant studies in which when patients of depression are given SSRIs, when they improve, they show improvement in OCD symptoms also. As we know, these are comorbid illnesses, depression and OCD. So what is found is when one improves, the other one also improves by the same treatment which is being given. Now you might feel I've strayed into drug therapy. No, I'm still talking about neural explanation. These type of studies which show that antidepressants bring about improvement in symptoms are indirectly supporting neural explanation because they're showing the role of serotonin in OCD. That's why. So that's one, neurotransmitters. The other is neural explanation as such parts of the brain which play a role in OCD. So yeah, definitely if you're writing about this, OFC is the main explanation, orbitofrontal cortex. Make sure you talk about that. The OFC, which is located in the basal ganglia, which are responsible for movement, seems to be damaged and impaired in the case of OCD patients. Specifically, this area which is called caudate nucleus, which serves to reduce the number of, we can say, worry signals that the OFC sends to the thalamus. That area, caudate nucleus, is damaged and thereby it is not able to subdue or reduce the activity of the OFC, resulting in the OFC sending too many worry signals to the thalamus. And this results in worrying type of obsessions, basically in obsessive thoughts. In neural explanation, to score in the highest mark band, you will have to memorize the names of these brain areas. Here, in fact, I've written OFC, you have to write the full name, orbitofrontal cortex, at least once. And then you can refer to it as OFC. Then only you will get full marks. So you have to know explicit names of neurotransmitters and of the brain regions which are involved to be able to get full marks. You can't write loosely. It counts for terminology and also for good understanding and knowledge. If you just say some brain part in the frontal lobe, like that, you won't get marks, high marks. You will have to name them specifically. Now, like I told you, I'm going to emphasize more on the neurotransmitters because I want to build a coherent answer with drug therapy. So even if I talk about the parts of the brain, if I talk about something like caudate nucleus, the dominant neurotransmitter there is dopamine because it's in the basal ganglia region, as I mentioned before. And serotonin is the link linking neurotransmitter between OFC and caudate nucleus. So again, no doubt these brain regions are impaired, but the impairment in the execution is seen with the help of the same neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters predominantly are playing a big role when it comes to OCD. Now coming to the drug therapy part of it. So this will be my first paragraph covering the first part of what is asked in the question for AO1. Then of course I have to switch to drug therapy. To make it coherent and to link with, I have taken special care to talk about neurotransmitters. I will say that the drug therapy that has been developed is revolving around these neurotransmitters only, serotonin and dopamine, or specifically more particularly serotonin, because it's found to play such a large role when it comes to OCD. Then I can start giving names of specific drugs. Again, to score highly, I have to give names of specific categories of drugs. Preferably, if I can give some examples of those drugs, that's even better. So first, I would give antidepressants and discuss both SSRIs, the category, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and tricyclics. For to elaborate on SSRIs, I would just explain how they work, the mechanism. They prevent reabsorption of serotonin into the presynaptic neuron after it has been released, thereby increasing serotonin availability in the synapse. And we've already seen the problem in OCD is reduced serotonin, so thereby it helps to cure OCD symptoms. I have to explain that way. And coming to tricyclics, they do the same thing for serotonin. They have an impact on noradrenaline also, but the same effect is there, preventing reabsorption of the neurotransmitters. So that is how they help to increase serotonin, thereby reduce symptoms of OCD. Then I could give the examples of anti-anxiety or anxiolytic medication. Also, like I said, you can give some specific examples of drugs, like say if you can name Prozac, which is fluoxetine under antidepressants, that will be good. Not compulsory, you can add something. Anxiolytics or anti-anxiety medicines also have been found to be effective recently. This doesn't directly link to what I have given before. These are more of recent findings that even some anxiety neurotransmitters could be playing a role in OCD, like GABA could be playing a role, gamma aminobutyric acid. So recently drugs have been developed which can increase GABA levels. When GABA levels increase, they have an impact on the worry circuit, which we have explained earlier, OFC and caudate nucleus and all. So definitely they will help in, this is how they are linked to the previous explanation, not directly to serotonin, but overall, and it's not just for the worry circuit, overall in the brain. These anxiolytics have a very calming effect. So they will calm down the worry circuits also, which can help to get rid of the OCD symptoms. Now, within anxiolytics also, I can give specific example of a class of medicines, basically benzodiazepines. They are the most commonly prescribed anxiolytics. And any specific example within that also, right now I'm not able to remember. If you can give. So these are also found to be effective interventions for OCD. What I want you to notice, I know you can write all of this, you must have memorized well. What I want you to focus is if they've given two things together, generally they are coherent. That's why they've not randomly combined any two things and given. So, neural explanation is linked to drug therapy. Drug therapy is the practical application of neural explanation. So, if you can also bring about that effectively, like I have done by talking about related things in both the sections, then you can score better because it shows your capacity to synthesize what you're learning. And 16 markers essay questions are always looking for higher thinking skills. So try to showcase that in the paper to score well. Okay, coming to what we could give for AO3. See, standard protocol in AO3, no matter which answer it is, which subtopic, whatever it is to begin with studies, research studies, right? To get full marks, you should have at least one evaluation point with supporting studies, one with a counterpoint, and one any general say issues and debates or any points. So there is a standard format. Let's follow that only, making sure that we integrate both. We don't give too much weightage to only the explanation, only the therapy. So preferably keep including both in all the evaluation points. That will just make it easier for you to go about maintaining balance. So when it comes to research studies supporting both the therapy and the explanation have supporting empirical proof. If we talk about the neural explanation, I remember the Menzies study is very famous. I think most of you would take that, Menzies et al. Menzies et al. Had done this MRI study in which they had investigated the brains of people with OCD and their close related family members, like their siblings, parents, and all. And what they had found was that there was this OFC impairment, which we were talking about earlier. The worry circuit impairment was there in the patients of OCD as well as their related family members who did not have OCD, suggesting that brain faults are the underlying mechanism for OCD. So, very strong evidence, and this is only one study of this type. There are many more. Maybe you're able to quote some other study. So, definitely a strength. It improves the validity of the explanation. Similarly, for drug therapy, I think Sumro et al. Is the most popular one because I think many textbooks have in fact covered that study. So Sumro was that analysis of 17 different studies, blind randomized control trials in which SSRI antidepressants have been compared with placebos. And what they found in most of these studies is those who take SSRIs, they show long-term improvement. Up to 3 months, they do not relapse into OCD compared to those who just take placebos. So definitely that is giving validity. When you write this, even if you don't want to take a separate point, evaluating the credibility of these studies, both the studies are very credible. Like Menzies et al. Is having brain imaging technology, which is free from errors. And Sumro et al. Is a meta analysis of many other studies. So it is a compound result of many studies, that also of randomized controlled trials, the best possible studies. So even if you don't want to write a separate paragraph showing the strengths of these studies, while writing these studies only you can keep hinting at why not only the empirical evidence, they're very strong empirical evidence for the theories. How to do that, you can see in the model answers that I have given, makes your points even stronger to get full 16 marks. Coming to what I would like to give as another point with a counterpoint type, and which is a easy one also, sensible one also, is real world application. So when it comes to real world application, definitely the explanation has resulted in drug therapy, as I pointed out earlier. That is only the application. So, what more we can elaborate on this is how drug therapy has been beneficial. It is a low cost treatment compared to taking personalized, say, ERP or any psychological treatment, CBT, any type of CBT from psychologists. Those are very expensive. They require paying an expert psychotherapist for number of sessions. So, the drug therapy which has come about is like a very affordable treatment for most patients. Also, it prevents like having to go get admitted in a hospital or community care, which can be traumatizing for patients who anyways have OCD, which is one of the most difficult mental disorders. So drug therapy has a lot of advantages and it's been implemented very successfully. You can also give some study which has shown its real world relevance to support this point. The counter to this would be, but there are a number of problems with drug therapy. One is dependency, not being able to get rid of the drugs after some time, becoming addicted to drugs. Side effects is a very strong point. You could name the side effects. There are milder side effects associated with SSRIs, and but still they are discomforting, can lead to non-adherence, though they are not dangerous. For tricyclics, dangerous side effects are there, like heartbeat skipping of people, and for benzodiazepines, emotionally traumatizing, psychologically disturbing impact is there, like memory loss is there. So you need to name these specific side effects in the counterpoint and say that's why, though it has resulted in good affordable treatment, maybe the treatment is not as good as it seems on the surface. It might be a problematic hazardous treatment also. So that is my point counterpoint evaluation for the explanation and therapy. What I want you to note is that in each point I have integrated both the explanation and therapy and I'm giving equal importance to both. It's not like I'm talking about only one while mentioning the other. So make sure you do that. Finally, not given any weakness directly as such. So what we could give as a weakness that could apply to both is that there are doubts on the credibility or validity of both neural explanation as well as drug therapy. When it comes to the neural explanation, why its credibility has been doubted is because recently it has been discovered that psychological explanation might be a better one, the cognitive explanation specifically. What is found is if we explain OCD as, if we explain OCD as not cognitive but behavioral, in terms of learning explanations, it's a better explanation. Firstly, we can apply the dual process model to it. You know the dual process model, I won't repeat it here. So if we apply the dual process model through classical and operant conditioning, it shows how OCD is acquired, just like it shows how phobia is acquired. And then why we are saying that is a better explanation than this? Like, what is the proof for that? That is a better explanation because there is a treatment based on it, exposure response therapy, which I'm sure you've come across, ERP therapy. ERP therapy has very high success rate. 60 to 90% people who take it become okay in the long term. Indirectly, that shows that is the correct explanation. Otherwise, how is the treatment that successful? Because it must be targeting the correct reason for why people have OCD. So then, if that is the better explanation, then this one, the biological one, might not be the correct one. It might be a secondary explanation that maybe applies to some people, not everybody, or it might not be a right explanation at all. It might be inflated, its importance. So that's why there are some doubts on the credibility. We are not falsifying it, we are just saying that it is time to reconsider. So, like I told you, for the neural explanation, because of the contrast or competition with the psychological CBT, dual process explanation, it loses its merits. It loses its merit. When it comes to drug therapy, publication bias has cast doubt on the credibility. I'm sure for depression also you've come, even schizophrenia, to a similar line of argument. What happens with these drug studies, because after all, the ones which are being used in OCD are more or less the serotonin ones, only depression. These serotonin studies, SSRIs and all, everyone knows they have been plagued with publication bias. Basically, drug companies have sponsored these studies. So what they end up doing is they publish only those studies which show that the drugs like SSRIs and all are effective. They don't allow those studies to be published which show they're ineffective, because that will result in them losing their profits from selling the drugs. Earlier, we have mentioned in AO1 that some of the reason why we believe serotonin is playing a role in OCD is because of what drug studies had found, what the antidepressant studies had found. Now, if the antidepressant studies themselves are biased, they are not meritorious because they have been sponsored and their results might not be as valid as it seems. That means even the explanation gets falsified because of that. Right? So that becomes very problematic. It is falsifying both the explanation as well as the therapy. At least it's casting doubt on both. So that would be a weakness point that I could take. What I want you to note is that I have taken only such points as strengths and weaknesses that I will be able to apply to both, not to only one, so that I'm able to give equal weightage to both. So that's a good way of going about my recommended way. It's not the only way, but my recommended way to address a question in which for some reason they have seen an integration between two topics. So even you show that, even you can see the integration between them. That can take you to full 16 marks and in turn your A star grade. Very quickly, the last thing I'll do for this lesson is go over other possibilities of what you could have covered in this answer. You could have also covered in the neural explanation part, the AO1 part, something to do with oxytocin. I'm sure in many textbooks you've learned that oxytocin is playing a role in OCD. Why I did not take that is, because I wanted to link, like I told you, for coherence. But you can get high marks, maybe not 16, but even if you just mention other actually discovered neurotransmitters that are playing a role. So one I can remember is oxytocin. If you want to talk about other areas of the brain which are playing a role in OCD, so for that part you could also include the prefrontal cortex besides the OFC. Patients with OCD are found to be like unable to suppress unnecessary thoughts and compulsions. So the PFC, which is the regulator, like we've seen for personality aggression and all also, is the one which seems to like not be able to suppress in their case unwanted activity. So you can talk about the PFC besides the OFC. OFC is very critical. That's why I emphasize you talk about OFC. Like it's very specific to OCD in particular. Otherwise, PFC is implicated in many disorders. But of course, you can talk about that as well. In drug therapy, for AO1 again, you could also include points about say D-cyclosterone, the new drug which has been found. So besides anxiolytics and antidepressants, even this one is today a very promising drug, though they don't know the exact mechanisms of why it works. Something again to do with increasing GABA and reducing the worry circuit in the brain. So that is one more point that I can think of. So there are many possibilities of what you've learned around OCD neural explanation drug therapy. You could give any of that. Now coming to what other things you could have given in AO3. You could pick up any issue or debate that would be applicable to both, like reductionism, biological reductionism, in fact. Both are reductionists because there are the explanations besides neural, like the one which I gave, psychological explanation. You could give that as an example. Or there are others also. The genetic explanation is there. You could give some concordance rates to support that even within biological, there are other possible explanations. So this becomes very selective. Same way instead of drug therapy, there are other therapies. Like I told you, ERP is there. There are other therapies also that are possible. Other CBT therapies you could give as example, or even psychoanalysis. Like Freud, he explained it in terms of problems in toilet training. That is what results in OCD. And then therapy is also targeted at free association dream analysis, trying to get rid of the unconscious problems that have emerged at the anal stage. So that way you could indicate how both are reductionist. Or you could take biological determinism, in the sense that don't confuse reductionism and determinism, in the sense the assumption that just because neurotransmitters are fluctuating or brain parts are not developing normally, the individual has to only develop OCD. There can be a free will component also. In terms of developing OCD, abusing drugs could result in OCD problems because drugs can hamper, like drugs which say increase dopamine, like I know hallucinogenics are commonly associated with schizophrenia, but they're also associated with OCD because they manipulate dopamine, and dopamine is implicated in OCD. So that choice of the individual to abuse those drugs could be a reason for developing OCD. And even if deterministically the person develops OCD because of neural problems, there is still that free will component in therapy. They can take ERP, work hard on that, and get rid of OCD. So free will cannot be totally ignored when it comes to OCD explanations and treatments. That could be a point. I'm sure you can think of many other points. These are just some examples of what else you could cover. There must be a number of other studies which are supporting or refuting the explanations of therapies. Those could also be your evaluation points. Yeah, that's what I can think of right now. Okay, so we have covered today attachment and psychopathology as well. My next video will be on paper 2 for May 2025, which will be about first biopsychology and then schizophrenia and so forth. So do stay tuned to the channel for more. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you have any feedback on the videos, you can leave them in the comments box below. And if you need one-to-one help from me, you can contact me. My details are there in the description box and pin comment. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon with another video. Goodbye.